Morning, it's Monday. I woke up this morning to a text from a friend of mine in the school division saying that we had lost a kid, that one of our students had succumbed to an overdose. And from what I understand, it sounded very unintentional. And so, again, that's one of the things that we need to pay really careful attention to. As you know, as teenagers, everybody feels like they're invincible and indestructible, but there's a lot of stuff out there that is extremely dangerous. And uh, right now there's an awful lot of fentanyl that's showing up in all sorts of other drugs, and it would be highly unusual for a high school kid in Regina or anywhere really to go out and intentionally want to use fentanyl. But it's showing up in cocaine, it's showing up in Molly, it's showing up in MDMA, it's showing up all over the place. And so when there's something around that dangerous, we have to be particularly careful. And I've talked about that sort of whole party mentality before, where when you start partying, it becomes much easier to try something else. And so, the last 8 or 10 parties you drank or smoked weed, and then you're at another party and you sort of been there, done that with those things, and somebody says, "Hey, do you want to try this?" And if you've been drinking, which is a classic disinhibitor, like it makes us stop caring about things, and cannabis does too, in a different way. It makes us stop worrying about really looking after ourselves. And so, uh, like, please be careful. And like I said, I'm sure that this was unintentional, but it's still sad, very sad. And uh, anyway, I what I wanted to talk about today kind of fits into this, sort of, although nothing really fits into losing a kid. Uh, is just the idea of respect. And I'm going to talk about that particular topic all week in different ways. So, above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him. And so he loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. So we have to care about ourselves. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on today was the respect that we have to have for the power of the drugs, including alcohol, that we are putting into ourselves or considering putting into ourselves. Because this stuff is powerful, it is strong. And unfortunately, we stop respecting it. We stop paying attention to how powerful this stuff is. But because it becomes a habit, and we change our thinking around it so that it doesn't seem to be like a big deal. I don't know how many times I've heard it's just marijuana, or it's just alcohol, and or it's just on the weekend, or it's just this, or it's just, excuse me, or it's just that. But this stuff isn't just. One of the things that happened this year is the Canadian government moved a little further on the legalization of cannabis products and legalized edibles and uh, other sort of more refined products. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about them. And the CCSA, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, has just released a really good document about it. And so I've put some of that in here. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So edible cannabis products, cannabis extracts, and cannabis topicals have unique health and safety risks that are inherent to dried cannabis. So this is from that CCSA document. High potency cannabis extracts increase the risk of over intoxication more than dried cannabis. So, you know, smoking regular weed can get you this high. If you start doing dabs and those kinds of things, which I'll talk about a little bit more, uh, make you much more intoxicated. And the more intoxicated you are, the less capacity you have to really pay attention to what's going on with you. And of course, the less respect you have for what's going on with you and yourself. Although limited, the available evidence indicates that frequent use of these products is associated with problematic cannabis use disorder, and mental health disorders. So over the last couple of months, I've had contact with several different families. Mostly the initial contact comes from the parent, whose son or daughter is having huge psychological problems because of the strength of cannabis that they've been using. So cannabis-induced psychosis, uh, uh, other cannabis health problems, which we'll get into a little bit more. Edible cannabis products can increase the risk of overall consumption and subsequent overintoxication and impairment. Because when unpackaged, they look like ordinary food and beverage products. So, I mean, if you see a brownie, most of us have eaten regular brownies and, oh, okay, that looks good. If you eat a cannabis-infused brownie, I gotta go let a dog out. I'm sorry. Frankie, come here. Sorry, life is never simple. We learned last week about staying patient. So you've got a regular brownie that you're used to. All of a sudden, you're starting to look at a cannabis-infused brownie. Oh, that looks good. And so you eat it. And one of the things about edibles that is a really common problem is people don't realize that they take much longer to become active in our system. So you eat your brownie and nothing happens in half an hour. And you think, well, that's not very strong. So you eat another brownie or another gummy or whatever. And hour and a half later, you realize that you've gotten way too much. Many cannabis overdoses are related to taking too much edible at one time. And it's really important to understand that you can overdose on cannabis, and not all overdoses are fatal. That's one of the things that people seem to get confused about, because they say, well, you can never overdose on cannabis. That is not true. The lethality of a cannabis overdose is relatively low, but that can still happen as well. Because when unpackaged, they look like ordinary food and beverage products. Edible cannabis products also increase the risk of unintentional ingestion, especially by children. We've had a couple of cases in Saskatchewan about that, where kids got into cookies or brownies that their parents had left out and became like seriously critically ill. And I know the first case that we had of that, I was on CBC talking about it, and I was amazed at the number of people that were trashing me and defending cannabis, and not really paying attention to the fact that this a toddler had ended up in ICU because of a cannabis overdose. Research on cannabis topicals, those are things that you rub on your skin, including the use of topical and transdermal trouble with that word. Cannabidiol, there you go, product is limited. That's CBD. There is, however, growing interest among dermatologists and consumers in these cannabis products. And I've talked before that CBD looks like it has a number of really good medicinal possibilities to it. But most high THC stuff doesn't have CBD in it. So again, we have to check our thinking, like not all marijuana is medical. And really, what is that anyway? And health impacts associated with long-term use of edible cannabis products, cannabis extracts, and cannabis topicals isn't known. So we really don't know kind of what's going to happen. So here's some pages out of that CCSA report. So the first one up here, where's my famous little laser pointer? First one up here is hashish. Anybody that's familiar with cannabis is usually familiar with that. It's been around for a long time. It's usually smoked or often mixed in with other dried cannabis or with tobacco. It can be vaped. It can be dabbed. Dabbing is when you heat up a metal instrument and touch it into the cannabis product to create smoke and inhale the smoke. THC is typically from 40 to 80%. CBD is less than 5%. So just in reference to the THC content, regular, like real natural cannabis from years ago was probably 8 or 10% THC. I have to let a dog in. I'll be right back again. Sorry, it was a different dog if anybody cares. So kief refers to a collection of trichomes that accumulates when sifted from dried cannabis using a 3-chambered grinder. So it's a slightly refined product. Again, it's sort of 40 to 50% THC, less than 5% CBD. So again, very little potential of any medicinal value. Like these things are about getting high. Then there's wax, and it's called crumble or butter. It looks a little bit like a candy, or actually, like a beeswax product almost. Wax is a solvent-based, so it's been created using butane extract that's named after its appearance and consistency. Wax varies in levels of THC depending on quality, but can contain well over 50% THC. Crumble is a drier, more crumbly form, and butter is like butter. These are usually vaped or dabbed, and THC between 26 and 70%. Shatter is a clear, crystalline-looking substance, very high in THC, above 70%, virtually no CBD in it. And live resin is made the same way as wax, but with a fresh cannabis plant material that's been immediately frozen after harvest. The reason this term live is the process has given resin a more intense and complex smell and taste. So not quite as high THC, but slightly different product. So typically these things are about getting high. Just a little more on live resin. It's usually vaped or dabbed. The other thing, and I'm not going to get into it too much today, is the increasing availability of cannabis vape, electronic vape implements, pens, and things like that. And rosin refers to cannabis extracts that were made using rosin tech, which is essentially the application of heat and compression. So it's like squeezing the sap out of it. And again, really high THC, low CBD, or zero CBD. So again, these products don't have any medicinal value. Tinctures and sprays, tinctures and oil sprays are products consisting of cannabis extract and a carrier liquid such as like coconut oil or something like that. And these products are the ones that were developed more for medicinal use. The high CBD ones are quite readily available, and I have talked to people that have had positive effects from them in terms of sleep and anxiety. We do need to remember that THC tends to make anxiety worse. So if you're going to use anything like that, please be careful. And then there's a balanced product that has sort of equal ranges of THC and CBD from 1% up to like 12.5. And then there's soft gels and capsules. Again, mixtures of THC and CBD. So you need to know what you're getting. And then here's the vape cartridges and disposable pens. And again, you can get varying degrees of percentages of THC and CBD. Okay, so there's a couple of significant health risks, both physical health and mental health risks, associated both with edibles and these higher THC products. One of them is cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is chronic vomiting related to too much cannabis use. And basically, what it seems to be is getting yourself in a constant overdose situation, like too much of anything, and your body will try and reject it. Because cannabis is fat soluble, it gets absorbed into your system, and so you can't throw it up, but your body is trying to throw it up. And so we had a young woman last week who, I think she ended up in the hospital 4 or 5 times because of this problem, and couldn't stop throwing up. And that's hard on everything. It's hard on your system, it's hard on your throat, it's hard on your nerves, it's hard on everything. Like you just feel awful. So I'll play this little video. It's a news piece that talks about that.
It's called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, or CHS, and it causes severe vomiting and abdominal pain with prolonged and heavy marijuana use, and it often goes undiagnosed. As the Canadian government prepares to legalize pot in just a few months, and as the drug gets stronger and more of these dispensaries pop up, there's concern that we will see more and more cases of CHS.
As cannabis use becomes more prevalent and more chronic, we are likely to see more cases over time.
Is that a concern for you?
Well, it is a concern because people are quite uncomfortable with it and they can get quite sick with it, with fluid imbalances and dehydration. So it is something that needs to be recognized. It does require medical attention.
Doctor.
So we'll skip past that. And then the other issue is cannabis-induced psychosis. And I've actually seen
some mental health professionals are warning Canadians about an increase.
I've seen much more of this in the last couple of years, since dabbing has become much more popular, since edibles and edibles were showing up long before they were legal. But since then, this problem has increased as well, which is a cannabis-induced psychosis, and it is a huge issue. We've had lots and lots of people end up in hospitals and detox because of cannabis problems much more often than we used to see.
In cannabis-induced psychosis, they say that although the drug is now legal, that doesn't necessarily mean it's risk-free. Let's bring in Chris Somerville. He's Chief Executive of the Schizophrenia Society of Canada, joining me today from Winnipeg. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
So before we alarm people, now that marijuana is legal, can you tell me a bit about the numbers? How much has there been a spike in people reporting cannabis-related psychosis?
Well, now that it's legal to talk about it, or rather to use it, people are much freer to talk about the use. And so the schizophrenia societies across Canada are experiencing more people talking about use. And even though they don't have psychosis or schizophrenia, I mean, people come to us for other reasons as well around depression and anxiety. And the main point, I think, is that no one should think that cannabis is harmless or benign. I mean, there are warnings for women who are breastfeeding, who are pregnant. There are warnings about respiratory problems. So when we come to the brain, a lot of people think that this is some sort of conspiracy by the government or the society to keep people from using cannabis. What we're all about is informing people about safe use, reducing harm, and be informed about the risks that can be had with use of cannabis.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of time, so I want to get right to the nuts and bolts. What qualifies as a psychotic episode, and who's most at risk?
The person most at risk for experiencing hallucinations and delusions, in which interferes their ability to understand reality, are those under the age of 25, because the brain is still developing between conception and 25, those who use high-potency cannabis, those who use daily are at a greater risk, and those who have a family history of mental illness have a 5 to 7-fold greater increase. 40% of all psychosis is associated with cannabis.
Okay, some good stats there. I appreciate that. But to hear what you're saying, or to delve into it, a psychotic episode is more likely to happen if you are predisposed to some kind of mental illness already?
That's not necessarily true.
Okay.
See, that's the great assumption that people think, is that you will automatically have schizophrenia regardless of whether or not you use cannabis or not. Schizophrenia is a much more complex illness than we ever thought. It is a number of illnesses, and it's not just one genetic factor. We know that people who live in impoverished states have higher rates of schizophrenia. So environmental factors are a part of the development of schizophrenia, and so are hallucinogenic drugs.
Just a few seconds left then to tell me, what's the messaging you're trying to get out today, Chris?
Well, before you use, learn all you can about safe use. Try to avoid use until you're in your late teens. Avoid high potency, and certainly do not use daily, because those who use daily have a 2 to 3-fold greater risk of developing psychosis.
Appreciate
Okay, so
your time. Thanks.
the respect thing. Even if you cannot change all the people around you, you can change the people you choose to be around. Life is too short to waste your time on people who don't respect, appreciate, and value you. Spend your life with people who make you smile, laugh, and feel loved. You know, and I've talked about this a few times. We have to be really careful about who we're hanging around with. And if the exclusive reason about hanging around with a group of people is to get high or drink, I really question how valuable those relationships really are. You know, we tell ourselves that they're our buddies, but if we take the drugs and the alcohol out of the picture, are we able to sit and have conversations with those people? Do they care how we feel? Do they want to listen to us? Do they want to spend time with us? So think about that. Again, respect, and respect the power of this stuff that you're putting into yourself. All right, thank you. I gotta stop this and that. Please be careful out there.